Jackson
Here, you look
Harrove
like you
and
could use
Kylie
this.
Ellison.
Thanks.
Two people from
I really
two
appreciate
different
it.
worlds. He
Take
had
care of
power.
yourself.
She had nothing. He was feared. She was forgotten. The world looked at him and stepped aside. The world looked at her and looked away. But something happened that no one expected. The man with all the power and all the money pretended to have nothing, stripped himself of every dollar, every connection, every signal of who he really was, because he was searching for something no empire could buy. And the only person who had it was the last person the world would ever have chosen. There were exactly 3 people on Earth who knew Jackson Harrove's real net worth. 2 of them were dead. The third, his razor-thin consigliere, Piers Caldwell, sat across from him in an armored Escalade idling outside the Four Seasons in Midtown Manhattan, and said, for what must have been the 100th time that year, "You need a wife." Jackson didn't look up from his phone. No. The Underwood family is offering their youngest daughter, 24, Princeton educated, speaks 4 languages. I said no. Because the problem wasn't a shortage of suitable women. The problem was a dead certainty, buried so deep it had calcified into bone, that no woman alive would ever love him for anything other than what he could provide. He was about to test that theory, and the test was going to cost him everything he thought he knew about love. Before we go any further, if you've ever loved someone who couldn't tell whether they were loved for who they were or what they had, this story is for you. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a love in the underworld drop. Now let's get into it. It took Jackson 3 weeks to build the identity. His name would be Jax Marrow, 35, recently laid off from a warehouse logistics company in Newark. No car, no credit, and a studio apartment in Kearney, New Jersey, rented through a shell LLC and then stripped of anything that cost more than what a man earning $14 an hour could afford. He bought clothes from Goodwill, work boots with cracked soles, a canvas jacket with a broken zipper. He grew his beard out and stopped getting his hair cut. He removed his Patek Philippe and locked it in a safe deposit box in Midtown, then replaced it with a Casio digital watch from a gas station for $8. He stood in the Kearney apartment bathroom, looked at himself in the speckled mirror, and thought, this will do. Piers Caldwell stood in the doorway and looked at the stained linoleum and the mattress on the floor and the kitchen faucet dripping a slow rhythm of brown water into the sink, and said, this is insanity. Jackson sat on the mattress lacing his thrift store boots. And for the first time in years, something in his face looked almost alive. Not happy exactly. More like a man who had been slowly drowning in still water and had finally decided to swim. 3 months. No contact with the organization except emergencies. No money except what I earn. No one knows who I am. And if someone recognizes you, no one sees Jax, Piers. That's the whole point. He got a job at Fresh Mart, a fluorescent-lit grocery box on the outskirts of Kearney where the produce wilted before it hit the shelf, and the manager, a sweating man named Gilroy, called everyone buddy in a tone that suggested he'd rather be calling them something worse. Overnight shift. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. minimum wage plus $1 because nights were hard to fill. He took the bus to get there, carried his lunch in a brown paper bag, and for the first time in his adult life, Jackson Harrove experienced what it felt like to be no one. It started small. The way the bus, she was wearing a blue cardigan pilling at the elbows and sneakers that had seen better years. She stumbled, not badly, one foot catching the edge of an uneven sidewalk slab. She caught herself with the particular grace that people develop when the world is constantly built a size too small for them. The quiet negotiation, the reflex, the knowledge that every stumble is public and every recovery is watched. A man in a leather jacket sidestepped her without slowing. A couple across the street didn't glance over. Jackson jogged across the road. Hey, can I grab one of those? She peered around the boxes at him. Brown eyes, dark and warm and wary. The eyes of someone who had learned that unsolicited help usually came with a price. I've got it. I can see that. But your arms are going to fall off in about 30 seconds. A pause. She studied him. The beard, the cracked boots, the broken zipper. But her assessment was different from Chelsea's and Priya's and Breen's. Those women had looked at him and seen what he lacked. This woman was deciding something else entirely. Whether he was safe. The top one, she said finally. It's lighter. He took it. Children's books, dog-eared and soft-spined. They loaded them into a white Toyota with a dented quarter panel. She opened the trunk with her hip because her hands were full, and she didn't perform the effort. Didn't minimize it. Didn't pretend. What are the books for? I run a reading program at the community center. For kids who need it. That's good work. It doesn't pay. Flat. The way you'd state the weather. She got in her car and drove away without asking for his number, without lingering. And Jax Marrow stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and realized that was the first conversation he'd had in 4 weeks where the other person hadn't been performing. She hadn't flirted, hadn't tried to impress him, hadn't calculated his worth or angled for information. She had simply been a person talking to another person. The interaction had lasted maybe 90 seconds, and it was the most real thing that had happened to him in years. He saw how the world treated her after that. Kearney was a small place, and the community center was 2 blocks from the laundromat, and so he saw her again and again. He saw her unlocking the center at 7 in the morning with keys in her teeth and coffee in one hand. He saw her chasing a 6-year-old down the sidewalk while the kid shrieked with laughter. He saw her sitting on the front steps one evening, eating a sandwich alone, reading a paperback with the spine cracked so far it was nearly in 2 pieces. And he saw the way other people treated her. At Fresh Mart one Wednesday evening, he watched from behind the cereal aisle as 2 women in yoga pants whispered to each other while Kylie reached for a box of pasta. One of them, ponytail, manicured nails, the casual cruelty of someone who had never been on the receiving end, said just loud enough. Some people really should try the salad section first. Kylie's hand froze on the pasta box for half a second. Just half a second. Then she put it in her cart and moved on. At the bus stop one morning, he watched her stand in the rain because 3 teenagers had sprawled across the entire shelter bench without shifting an inch. A man waiting for the same bus looked at Kylie, looked at the rain soaking through her cardigan, and then took a deliberate step sideways, not to make room, but to create distance, as though standing near her might be read as association. Jackson stood at the margins of his false life and watched all of it. He had started this experiment to discover whether anyone could love him without his money. He hadn't expected to spend most of it watching someone else navigate a different kind of invisibility, one that had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the smallness of other people's imaginations. But smallness had a way of making moments of genuine kindness stand out like light through a crack in a wall. Their second real conversation happened because of rain. He was leaving Fresh Mart at 6 in the morning after his shift, bone-tired, smelling of cardboard and floor cleaner, when the sky opened. Not drizzle. A full assault. Sheets of water that turned the parking lot into a shallow lake in under a minute. He stood under the store's awning, debating whether to walk to the bus stop and accept the drowning. That's when he saw the white Toyota with the dented quarter panel sitting in the parking lot with its hood up, steam rising from the engine. Kylie was in the driver's seat with the door open, staring at the radiator like it had personally offended her. She was already wet. Her green cardigan, different one, still pilling, was dark with rain across the shoulders. That doesn't look great, he said, walking over. Box guy. Recognition flickered. Jax. I remember. What happened? Radiator hose cracked. Apparently this is what you get when you drive a car held together by prayer and duct tape. She pulled out her phone, looked at it, put it back. I called a tow. They said 45 minutes. That was an hour ago. He sat down on the wet curb next to her car. She looked at him with that expression he was beginning to recognize. Not suspicion exactly, but careful attention, as though she was waiting for the catch. You don't have to wait with me. I know. Seriously, you just got off a night shift. You look exhausted. I am. But I'm already soaked and the bus doesn't come for 20 minutes, so, he shrugged. Tell me about the reading program. Another long study. Then she sat down on the wet curb beside him. Her program was called Read Bridge. She'd started it 4 years ago after quitting a soul-deadening desk job at an insurance company. The community center gave her the space for free in exchange for running their after-school activities, which meant she was technically working 2 jobs for the pay of 0. She had 23 kids, ages 6 to 12, most from families where books were a luxury and reading for pleasure was an abstraction. She drove to library sales and thrift stores across 3 counties. She wrote grants on weekends. How many times have you been turned down? 14. 15, actually. I forgot the Holcomb Foundation. They sent a letter so politely devastating I framed it. Almost a smile. It said my program showed admirable community spirit, but didn't align with their strategic funding priorities. Which I think means they gave the money to someone with a better logo. That's criminal. That's nonprofits. The tow truck arrived 40 minutes late. The driver looked at Kylie and her steaming Toyota and said, "This thing's barely worth towing." Jackson felt something sharp and hot rise in his chest, the reflex of a man who had spent 17 years making people regret their disrespect. He swallowed it. Jack's marrow didn't have that power, but Kylie didn't need it. She met the driver's eyes with a steadiness that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with exhaustion crystallized into patience, and she said, "It's worth towing." And the driver looked away first. If Kylie just earned your respect, drop a fire in the comments right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is exactly the time. This story is just getting started. He thought about her steadiness for days. The way she never asked the world to make room. She just kept moving. What he didn't know was that she was starting to think about him too. He didn't plan to see her again. Not immediately. The experiment had a protocol. Observe, don't engineer. But Kearney was small, and Reed Bridge was 2 blocks from his bus stop, and Kylie Ellison started her days earlier than almost anyone. He began stopping by in the mornings. Not to see her. He told himself that. Just coffee from the cart on Bergen Avenue before his walk to the bus. Just coincidence that she often arrived at the community center at the same hour. Keys in her teeth. Tote bag of supplies dragging from one shoulder. They developed a rhythm without naming it. He'd hold the community center door. She'd say thank you without looking up. Sometimes they talked for 5 minutes on the steps before she had to go in. Once, they talked for 20. She never asked him about money. She never asked where he lived with the particular precision that signaled she was calculating something. She asked about his opinions, whether he thought kids learned better through competition or collaboration, whether he'd read anything good lately, whether he thought there was a difference between a person being kind and a person being good. He'd never been asked that before. Not genuinely. Not by someone who actually wanted to know the answer. "I think kind is what you do when people are watching," he said. "Good is what you do when they're not." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in a while." Then she went inside and he walked to the bus stop with something unfamiliar sitting in his chest. He tested her without meaning to. Or maybe he was always testing. Old habit. The reflex of a man who trusted no one. He told her he'd been late on rent. That Gilroy had cut his hours. That the month was going to be tight. She didn't offer money. She didn't perform sympathy. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and said, "I know someone at the warehouse on Fuller Street. They're hiring for daytime receiving, pays better. You want the name?" That was it. No pity. No repositioning of power. Just a name on a piece of paper she'd been carrying around in case someone needed it. He almost told her then. He was sitting across from her on the community center steps, holding a stranger's phone number in her handwriting, and he thought, "She doesn't know. She has no idea who I am. And she is being kind because that is simply what she is, not because of what I can provide, not because of what I'm worth, but because a man she met outside a laundromat looked like he could use a name on a piece of paper, and she happened to have one." He didn't tell her. Not yet. But the wall inside him, the one that had been calcifying for 3 years, built from Nicolette and Serena and Yara with her recording device, and every woman who had loved the empire instead of the man, developed its first crack. One crack was enough. Because the world was already watching. And the world had opinions. It was Marcus who said it first. Marcus was Kylie's closest friend, 6'2", loud laugh, the kind of loyalty that came with sharp edges. He'd known Kylie since college. Watched her pour herself into underfunded dreams and walk away from men who treated her like a consolation prize. And he had opinions about the quiet man with the cracked boots who kept appearing on her steps. "You don't know anything about him," Marcus said. They were in Kylie's kitchen. Jackson knew this because she'd mentioned it later. Casual, the way you'd mention weather, but the words found him anyway. He stocked shelves, key. No car, no plan. That's not a situation. That's a trajectory. He's kind. Kind doesn't pay rent. Neither does judgment. She said it without heat. Marcus backed down. But it cost her something. Jackson could see it in the careful way she mentioned him in the days that followed. The slight distance. The sense that she was holding 2 things that mattered and trying not to let them collide. Pierce found him on a Wednesday. He appeared at the door of the Kearney apartment like a ghost in an expensive suit and sat down on the mattress with the particular stillness of a man who had decided not to say "I told you so," and said, "The Underwood situation has escalated. There's a meeting." I said I'm not available for 3 months. It's not that kind of meeting, Jackson. Someone is asking questions about your absence. Delacroix's people. They think you're compromised. Handle it. I've been handling it. But they want a show of presence. A signature, at minimum. I can bring the documents here. No. You'll expose the address. Pierce looked around the apartment. The dripping faucet, the gas station watch on the windowsill, the Goodwill jacket on the hook by the door, and said nothing. But his expression said everything. Is this worth it? Jackson didn't answer. But that evening he walked to Bergen Avenue and stood outside the community center, and through the window, he could see Kylie reading to 6 children arranged on a rug the color of a school bus. She was doing voices. The children were completely still. One small girl had her hand wrapped around Kylie's sleeve, not holding it exactly, just touching it, the way children hold on to things that feel safe. Jackson stood on the sidewalk in the October dark. His organization was running without him. His enemies were circling. Pierce was losing patience. The Underwood family was waiting. 17 separate concerns required his name on something. And he was standing on a public sidewalk watching a woman he'd known 5 weeks read the phantom toll booth to children who had nowhere better to be. He didn't go inside. He wasn't supposed to go inside. He went home. But he came back the next morning. The morning after that, everything broke open, starting with him. He started making mistakes. Small ones. The kind a careful man makes when he is no longer being careful, because some part of him has decided, without consulting the rest, that he is done hiding. He paid for her coffee without thinking. Not the Jack's way. Not counting change and calculating. Just automatically, the reflex of a man who had picked up checks his entire adult life. She looked at him. He felt her looking. I got paid Friday. It's fine, he said. She let it go. But she watched him differently after that. He mentioned a restaurant in the city, a specific place, the kind that didn't exist in the vocabulary of a man earning $14 an hour, and caught himself mid-sentence and pivoted so clumsily that she finished her coffee very deliberately and didn't ask the follow-up question she'd clearly started forming. He called Pierce that night. I'm close to telling her. Tell me you're joking. I'm not asking your permission. Pierce's voice dropped to the register he used when he needed Jackson to actually hear him. You have no idea how she'll react. You've known this woman 6 weeks. The test was to see if someone could love you without the money, not to fall in love with her before you found out. Jackson sat on the mattress in the dark. Rain on the window again. Kearney was relentlessly wet in October. What if she already does? Pierce had no answer for that. Because Jackson had been watching, meticulous, the way 17 years of survival had trained him to be, and what he saw in Kylie Ellison was not a performance. There was no calculation in the way she looked at him. She didn't lean in when he mentioned the warehouse job. She didn't grow distant when he talked about the tight month. She got quieter when she thought he was sad. She remembered things he said. 3 weeks ago, she had brought him a book, slid it across the community center steps without preamble. You said you liked to read. I found this at a sale and thought of you. A water-damaged copy of East of Eden. 50 cents, probably. It was the most expensive gift anyone had given him in years. He opened it that night and found a scrap of paper tucked between the pages as a bookmark, a grant application draft, half finished, her handwriting pressing hard against the lines like the words couldn't come fast enough. He read 2 pages before he realized what he was doing. She had been turned down 15 times, and she was still writing the 16th application with that same pressing urgency, as though the right door had to exist somewhere if she kept looking hard enough. He sat in the dark for a long time. Then he opened his real laptop, not the Goodwill machine, and made a phone call that Jack's marrow could never have made. That phone call would start a chain reaction, and chains, once moving, cannot be stopped. He should have been more careful about the timing. He knew Delacroix's people had been watching. He knew his 3-month disappearance had generated exactly the kind of speculation he'd counted on Pierce to suppress. What he had not counted on was Delacroix himself appearing on a Tuesday night at a Fresh Mart in Kearney, New Jersey, accompanied by 2 men Jackson recognized and one he didn't, pushing a cart through the cereal aisle at 11:15 p.m. with the practiced casualness of a man delivering a message. Jackson kept his head down and stocked the bottom shelf. He didn't look up. He breathed. Delacroix walked past him, paused. Jackson felt the pause the way you feel a gun pressed between your shoulder blades, the specific, unmistakable weight of being recognized. Delacroix crouched down to his level with the deliberate ease of a man comfortable in every position and said, "Jax, working hard." Jackson said nothing. "Funny place to spend a Tuesday. Mutual friend says you've been hard to reach." "I've been busy. Doing this." "Not a question." "Then, of course. Give my regards to Pierce." He left, and Jackson sat on the Freshmart floor and understood with complete clarity that the clock had run out. Kylie was waiting for him on the community center steps the next morning at 6, which meant she'd come early on purpose. She had 2 coffees. She handed him one without ceremony, looked at his face, and said, "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't." They sat in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. The morning moved on Bergen Avenue around them. Then she said quietly, "I got the funding." He looked at her. "The Dunmore Foundation. Anonymously recommended. They called me yesterday." She looked at her coffee cup. "I don't know who," the program director wouldn't say, but someone put in a word. Somebody who knew the specific details of the application. A pause. The details I've only talked about with one person. The silence between them shifted into something entirely different. "Kylie, don't." Her voice was steady. "Don't tell me it wasn't you. I know it was you. What I don't know is how." He looked at his gas station Casio, at his cracked boots, at the Kearney sidewalk at 6 in the morning, and he felt, not with relief, not with dread, but with the peculiar calm of a man who has finally run out of excuses to keep lying, that it was time. Time always comes. The question was never whether she'd find out. It was whether she'd stay. He didn't do it dramatically. That surprised her later. She had expected the cinematic version. What she got was a man sitting on concrete steps with a gas station coffee and a 4-week beard who said, plainly, "My name isn't Jax Marrow." She didn't move. "My name is Jackson Harrove. I own a holdings company based in Manhattan. The legitimate side is worth roughly $400 million. The other side," he stopped for a moment. "I'll explain the other side another time." The morning traffic moved on Bergen Avenue like none of this was happening. The apartment, the job, the boots. All real. All deliberate. "I've been living this for 8 weeks. Why?" Not a question. A demand. He told her about Nicolette. About Serena. About Yara and the recording device taped under the restaurant table in Positano and the federal agent she'd been feeding information to for 9 months. He told her about 3 years of sealed-off certainty that love was a transaction and transactions could be gamed. He told her about Pierce in the Escalade saying you need a wife, and the Underwood family, and the cold arithmetic of men who measured connection in bloodlines and alliances. He told her he had needed to know if it was possible to be loved with nothing. "And so you just," she stopped. "Started again. You tested me. I tested the concept." "That's not a distinction, Jackson." His real name in her mouth sounded wrong and right at the same time, like a key turning in a lock you'd forgotten was there. "I'm not a concept. I know. I told you about Reed Bridge. About the 15 rejections. I gave you a book that cost 50 cents, and it was a real thing that I did because I meant it. And this whole time her voice broke slightly, repaired itself. "You were real," he said. "Everything you did was real. That's the point. That's exactly why I'm telling you. You got me the funding." "Yes." Without asking. "You'd been turned down 15 times, Kylie. The Dunmore Foundation had the capacity. I made a call." She stood up, walked 3 steps away from him, stopped, turned around. "When did you know? When did you actually know?" He thought about the community center window at night. The girl with her hand on Kylie's sleeve. The water-damaged book. The grant application written by hand. Pressing hard like the words couldn't come fast enough. Like she still believed the right door existed if she just kept knocking. "When you gave me the book," he said. She stood on the Bergen Avenue sidewalk in the October morning and looked at him. At the cracked boots and the beard and the Casio watch and the man inside all of it. And something moved through her expression that he couldn't name and couldn't look away from. She didn't say anything. She walked to her car and drove away. He let her go. For the first time in his adult life, Jackson Harrove let someone walk away and did not send anyone after them. He moved out of Kearney that week. Not because the experiment was over, although it was. Not because Delacroix's appearance had made the apartment untenable, although it had. He moved out because staying felt like waiting in the dark for a verdict he had no right to pressure. He gave Pierce the address on a Thursday. The organization re-stabilized by Friday. The Underwood situation resolved through other channels. His real life, the one that moved in shadows and conference rooms and armored vehicles, resumed as though the 8 weeks had never happened. Except they had happened. His apartment in Manhattan felt wrong. Not the marble or the view or the silence. Those things had always been fine. It felt wrong because it was full of the engineered distance he'd spent 17 years constructing between himself and the possibility that someone could see him without the architecture. He'd had that distance dismantled, piece by piece, over 43-minute conversations on a Kearney sidewalk. And now it was gone, and the space it left behind was enormous. Pierce brought the papers that required signatures and said nothing and left. 11 days passed. On the 12th day, his phone rang from an unsaved number. He almost didn't answer. "I want to be angry." Kylie's voice. Level. That crystallized patience he'd first seen on the morning with the tow truck driver. "I've been trying to stay angry. Marcus thinks I should stay angry. He has several compelling arguments." Jackson sat down. "But I keep coming back to one thing. You sat on a wet curb at 6 in the morning and waited with me for a tow truck you didn't need to wait for. You didn't have to do that. Jax Marrow didn't need anything from me." A pause. "And you still stayed." He said nothing. He didn't trust his voice. "I've been thinking about what you said. About kind being what you do when people are watching, and good being what you do when they're not. The funding call happened before I found out. You didn't do it so I'd find out. You just did it. It was the right thing to do." "Yeah." Quietly. "It was." He heard her breathing. He heard Kearney in the background, Bergen Avenue traffic, the sound of a city being small. "I'm not agreeing to anything," she said. "I'm not pretending this isn't complicated. But I would like to have a conversation. A real one. Where I know who I'm talking to. Anywhere you want. Anytime. The steps. Tomorrow morning. 6. I'll be there." And Jackson. The first time she'd used his real name without breaking stride. "Bring your own coffee. I'm not carrying 2 cups up Bergen Avenue for a billionaire." He almost smiled for the first time in 11 days. "Understood," he said. They didn't become a fairy tale overnight. Kylie didn't move into the penthouse. Jackson didn't ride in on armored vehicles to declare his love on the community center steps while children clapped and Marcus changed his opinion in real time. What happened was slower and more honest than that. She met Pierce, who called her formidably composed, and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. She met Thatcher, Jackson's younger brother, who looked at her and then looked at Jackson and said, "You wore Goodwill boots for this one." He said it like it was the most sensible thing he'd ever heard. Jackson started showing up to Reed Bridge on Saturday mornings. Not as a donor, though the funding continued quietly through proper channels. As a volunteer. He was terrible with the 6-year-olds. He was decent with the 12s. One boy decided Jackson was kind of okay because he knew the ending of East of Eden by heart. Jackson Harrove, who had spent 17 years making grown men stammer, spent his Saturday mornings being evaluated by a 10-year-old. He didn't mind. Because the thing he'd gone looking for in Kearney, the thing he'd stripped himself to nothing to find, was exactly this. Not grand gestures. Not transactions. Not the performance of love that calibrated itself to what he could provide. Just a person who looked at the man behind everything. And stayed. He still had the Casio watch. He put it in a drawer in the Manhattan apartment, next to the Patek Philippe, and sometimes in the mornings before he left for Bergen Avenue, he looked at both of them. The expensive one told him what time it was. The $8 one told him who he was. "Here's what I need you to answer in the comments right now, and I want your honest answer. Would you have stayed? After finding out he tested you for 8 weeks, after every conversation was built on a lie, would you have made that call? Or would Marcus have been right? Drop it below. And if this story hit you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because some people forget that the realest love rarely looks like what the world told you to look for. Subscribe to Love in the Underworld. The next story drops soon. And I promise you, it hits harder than this one.